Get started. Welcome, welcome, welcome in again. I'm so honored to be here. For those of you who don't know, I am reelaviolette Ward. I am the founder of Black Womxn Healing, and I am also a very, very proud professor at Merritt College in Oakland, California. And I am currently teaching a course called Black Womxn Radical Media. I dropped the link in the chat to our course website. So please go ahead and check that out if you want to check out our syllabus and get a little bit more understanding of what me and my students at Merritt College have been doing this semester. And a part of the course is this community lecture series, family. So our intention with this is to make the knowledge accessible to our people, to our folks, right? We know that sometimes we don't always have the opportunity to go back to school, but we want this lecture series to be just a little snippet into what my students are learning this semester. This lecture is going to be uploaded, right, for the students and a part of what they're learning on the syllabus. And the community lecture series is an opportunity for folks who are featured in the syllabus to come speak with the students and come speak with the community about the things that we've been learning collectively. So the intention for the course is really to think about when and how do Black women have opportunities to be fully nuanced on screen, right? We are really leaning into media representations and depictions that invite Black women into our wholeness and into our fullness. Section 1 was thinking about Black women's relationship to mass media and social media. Section 2 is thinking about Black girl disrespectability, all the ways that we are rejecting respectability politics within media, and how we make room and space for queer and trans Black women, how we unapologetically center sexual agency and sexual liberation. And so I'm hella excited to have this dope ass panel of Black women who inspire me, who are my homegirls, sisters, and scholar friends. I wanted to say my doctoral candidate sisters, but peace and love is a doctor, y'all. So I can't even say that. We have a sister who done made it to the other side. Shout out to Dr. Peace and Love, and also to Zalika and Kerby, who are PhD candidates. And I'm just so honored, y'all. I'm so honored and so excited to be here. So I'm gonna go ahead and dive into these bios. But I just want to give y'all a little heads up. I don't know if y'all ready, because these bios is so fire. So when you hear some fire shit from the bio, just go ahead and drop an emoji. Go ahead and hype up a sis in the chat and let them know you doing the damn thing. We see you. We are so proud of you, because when I say that my homegirls is slaying, they slaying. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with Kerby Lynch, who is currently a PhD student at UC Berkeley, as am I. She considers herself a child of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, Occupy Oakland, and the radical legacy of lesbian feminism in the Bay Area. Currently, they work on issues of police violence accountability, dismantling the carceral state, and sexual justice. Kerby is a high school educator that teaches courses on Indigenous counter mapping and California Native history to local students of color. Kerby is also a community archivist. Come on, archives. We're going to get into it. For the Bay Area Lesbian Archives, where they work to preserve the life stories of radical lesbian activists who strived and successfully created alternative worlds. Kerby, it's so good to have you here. When I tell y'all, me and Kerby been holding each other down through this PhD journey. We are both in year 5, y'all, and we making it through. So I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you for being my sister. Thank you for holding me down. Thank you for supporting me and guiding me in this journey. I'm so grateful for you and so grateful for you being here. Next, we have my dear fellow Philly Joins, Zalika, who is a multidisciplinary artist and doctoral candidate of African and African diaspora studies at UT Austin. She engages Black material and digital publics as the landscape to trace the human sexual geographies between the relation of the Black femme and spectator. Their relationality is tethered to the logics of shame, desire, and pleasure. We're gonna get into it, y'all. She uses Black gender and sexuality analytics to engage visual culture studies through the logics of Black porn / sex work studies. She specializes in haunting, Black queerness, horror, flesh, the human and deviant Blackness. I told y'all wasn't ready. It's just too fire. I gotta take a breath and take a break. It's just too fire. Okay, I'm wrapping up. As a scholar and performance-based photographer, she uses the experimental approaches of research creation to engage Black study. And you can follow Zalika on Twitter. Go ahead and drop your Twitter link, please, in the chat so folks can know.
I ain't on more, but
you ain't on there no more. Okay, well, drop where folks can find you. Kerby, you too. Let them know where they can find you, because they're gonna be ready to continue learning from y'all after this heat. And finally, we got Dr. Peace and Love, who is a Black Studies Collaboratory postdoctoral fellow. Basically, what that means is they continuing to pay her for her brilliance at UC Berkeley, and we love to see it. Okay, and lecturer in the African American Studies Department at UC Berkeley. She is a Black feminist urban ethnographer and critical porn studies analyst whose research and teaching primarily focuses on Black / queer communities and hood environments, music, porn, and performance. She is excited to thread today's themes with conversations from her research projects. The first uses Black femmes' theatrical performances from online interracial pornography to read real-life state policing encounters and vice versa. The second project offers ethnographic case studies on Black femmes who use erotic performance as a mode of survival, artistry, and pleasure amid genocide of low-income Black neighborhoods in Oakland, California. I just gotta take a break, y'all, because I told y'all wasn't ready. I already read this and I'm still not ready. So, we gonna get into it, y'all. Broadly, both streams of research illuminate how these femmes employ what she calls erotic mastery to navigate, negotiate, and rattle the racialized pornographic economy of anti-Black policing, captivity, and ultimate genocide in the US. Then Peace and Love got a nerve to say fun fact, all right? So after all that, we're gonna end with a fun fact. Amidst all the fray, Dr. Peace and Love finds joy. Come on, joy, we're gonna end with joy in mastering herself as an intergalactic thinker, writer, and creative. Welcome, welcome, Dr. Peace and Love. I'm so honored to know you and to witness your growth. We connected about 6 years ago in this doctoral journey, and now sis has made it to the other side. So I'm just so proud of you and so honored to have you on this panel. And y'all, before we dive into these questions, can we y'all go ahead and unmute and let us sis know you slaying, we see you, them bios is fire. Let's just take about 30 seconds to just shower these panelists with love, with affirmation.
We see y'all, the brilliance is fire. Come on.
Come through.
Top notch.
Top notch. I say.
Truly legendary, okay?
Legendary. It's
phenomenal.
It's not easy to do this work, y'all. It is not easy to do this work. And so I'm just so proud of y'all. I'm so proud of all that y'all have accomplished and the intention behind y'all's work. And that's really, we can do this intellectual game, but like to do real ass work in academia takes a lot. And so I just want to honor and affirm the labor that goes into the work that y'all do, and to let y'all know that you are so deeply appreciated. Ashe, y'all. I'm just filled up just from the bios. Now we gonna dive in. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. Let us know your name again, what you want to be called, your hometown, a little bit more about the work that you do, and how did you end up doing this work? What was your personal journey into using and or studying media as a tool for self-expression and liberation? And the last part of the question, what does Black women in radical media mean to you within the context of the work that you do? So we are going to go ahead and start it off with Zalika. Sis, come through with a word.
You know, I got tricked because you started with Kerby. And I was thinking, well, maybe I'll be second. All right.
Hey, the join in me sees the join in you, and the join in me said, let's start with Philly. And before
all right.
Listen, I'm gonna just say this. We got 2 Philly joins in the building, and we got 2 Bay Area legends in the building. So from coast to coast, we see y'all. Go ahead, Zalika. We ready.
I wanna thank you for inviting me, y'all. So it's interesting. So backstory. Rhea and I actually have known each other since we were teenagers. So it's really interesting because we were in a youth organization when we were kids. And Rhea goes by something else now. But back then, you know, she was very determined she was going to be a Delta and she was going to go to Spelman. She did those 2 things, right? Now, me, on the other hand, I had a very different path and interest. Somehow, some way, we both ended up doing similar work and like going through Black studies spaces. So we actually reconnected, I want to say September or something like that. So we reconnected in September. So it's just interesting to see us come back together in this way in different parts of the country, but still 2 Philly Johns doing it. So shout out to Reed. Thank you so much. I'm glad that we reconnected in the most randomest of ways, but really happy it happened. Hello, everyone. My name is Zalika U, Ibaorimi, but you can call me Z. As Reed already stated, I go to UT Austin. I'm in the African and African Diaspora Studies Department, and I'm currently Woodson Fellow at UVA right now. So I wanted to say that because I see some Woodson people here. So shout out to y'all for making it. And I want to also say shout out to my family and also some of my friends who made on the call. And of course, ancestors, Orishas, the whole 9. So I shaded that. Now, a little bit about myself. I identify as an organizer from Philadelphia. I belong to the Malcolm X grassroots movement, and I want to put in a quick plug. Next week, our organization will actually be having Matulu Week for Dr. Matulu Shakur, who is a political prisoner who's been in prison for the last 35 years. So the objective is to have 35 actions from 35 different organizations in commemoration of those 35 years in remembrance of that. And we're trying to get him free. He is very ill. So once again, free all political prisoners and, you know, free the land, of course. In addition to that, I recently just joined Philadelphia Red Umbrella Alliance, and I also belong to this committee known as the No Humans Involved Committee, all things that really address sex work and drug use as well. A little bit more about myself. I'm additionally a former sex worker. So this is actually a lot of where I get my analytics from. So of course, my Blackness, my feminist, you know, my queerness, all those things combined inform my study, inform my experiences even as an artist, even as a research creator as well. So one thing that I will say about the journey is that, you know, it started for me at Georgia State University, participating in, you know, writing my master's thesis. Originally, I came and arrived at the work with an interest in Afrofuturism, but in some ways I felt like that theoretical frame did not necessarily speak to the populations of femmes that I was talking to, the populations of Black women at the time that I was talking to, as they were considering a future, but one where it was devoid of a type of personhood or a type of humanity, not actually engaging or recognizing themselves as humans in a world that already codes them as not a human involved at all. However, they found something productive and generative in that way of being. And so therefore, I felt like it was most appropriate to engage a darker study of Black studies, one that goes beyond just thinking through social death, but one that thinks about the ways that Black femmes are able to inhabit that to their own advantage. One that may be capitalist oriented, or one that may be anti-capitalist in nature. But that was one of the things that I sought after. But instead of trying to gather more Black femmes to interview, instead of having them trudge through this darkness and through some of these modes of violences, I opted instead to use my body as a vessel to go through a series of performances so that no other person would have to go through it, so I can kind of test those waters myself. Obviously, it was a lot of spiritual work that needs to be done around the work that I kind of do, but in using my body, I, for the last 3 to almost 4 years, have engaged in a series of studies that involve and require internet engagement, spectators to view what it is that I'm doing, even if they don't understand what it is that I'm trying to assemble for the public. So as a result, the images, the performances helped me to disassemble and reassemble what it was that I was looking at. So from there, my project was ultimately born and birthed. So first came John Theories, and then came Hoentology as the second set of performances as well. And then of course, what really, really emanated was a deeper study on desirability, not in the sense of, oh, you know, such and such is really, really pretty, it's hard to be pretty, but more so in looking at Black transness, looking at Black sex workers. I was finding that these economies of desire, the inhabitants of desire, really often had violent ends. And this was something that I wanted to explore within the work, Haunted Femmes, Haunting Spectators, which is my dissertation project right now. So I'm sorry, I'll stop there.
Fire, fire. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. And I just want to honor, like, again, when I say it's not easy and you talking about you using your body, I just was feeling like how heavy that must be to be in that process, and like the sacrifice that it requires of you to like be holding that, you know, holding the weight of that in your body. So I just want to honor and affirm you and appreciate you. And let's go to Peace and Love next, and then we'll close out with Kerby. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your hometown, the work you do, how you ended up there, and what Black Women in Radical Media means in the context of your work.
Thank you, thank you. Can everybody hear me? I want to do a sound check first. Okay, good, good. So first and foremost, oh my goodness, I'm so happy to be here today. As we kind of stated earlier, this is me coming back to Oakland. So this is my, you know, as my friends, colleagues, and mentors like to frame it, my homecoming. So I literally could not be more honored. This is my first community event back. So it's huge. This is a huge moment for me. So thank y'all for joining. Thank y'all for taking the time, energy, and effort just to be here today. I'm so excited with you all's excitement and by you all's excitement. So that's the precursory statement. I did want to say, so just to introduce myself, my name is Peace and Love El Henson. And if you would like to, you know, stunt a little bit, Dr. Peace and Love, because that's something I'm trying to own. It was a arduous, long, challenging journey, but I'm here and I not only survived, but I also thrived, and I'm thriving. And so I'm excited for that. So I want to backtrack a bit. Originally, I'm from Oakland, California, deep east to be exact. So if folks from East Oakland or Oakland, just in general, let's go. Please bang your hood in the chat. And so that's like that's the structural environment and structural neighborhood environment from which I'm working in, just to give you all a clear sense of where I was raised. And much of my experience and much of my research is founded in that particular living moment and living space. And I think that particularly in these types of environments, it's such a rich space, such a rich space of culture, and seeing how these, these spaces function, and really understanding how these social structures shape our experiences. And so, as part of my journey, growing up in Oakland, California, in the hood in Oakland, California, and across many different hoods in Oakland, California, it means that, when I actually got into college at UC Berkeley, so let me just say, I was also African-American Studies major at UC Berkeley. And so this is where my kind of journey started with Berkeley and my journey to return. So first and foremost, I was an African-American Studies major and education minor. And this connection with my life journey and research really happened in that space, where I was able to conduct my honors thesis and think about how do Black women from hood environments in Oakland, California matriculate to elite public universities such as UC Berkeley. And so that was one of my first real and huge studies, being able to think critically about not only my lived experiences, but other Black, queer, young women who grew up in hood environments across Oakland. How did they matriculate and come into this space? And just to say at the outset, I only was able to do 6 interviews by young Black women from Oakland in UC Berkeley. And that's an issue. That's a huge issue. It's a huge structural issue. And just to think about the close proximity of Oakland to Berkeley, and what does that mean when you have gates around such a close space? That means like we are literally barring particular communities out of this university setting. And so I really wanted to gain a deeper understanding of that. I must say that I was homeschooled before I entered in the public education school system. So I had a particular sense of my cultural identity before I got into the public school system, and tracking that journey and being able to reflect on it in this study, on this ethnography, that was also combining educational studies to look at these young Black women from hood environments in Oakland, and to understand what was their journey like into getting where they are during that time, which was in college. And so it was some really interesting findings that I hope that, as the conversation becomes relevant, we can talk about it, and some interesting things that I found there. But I'll leave that there. And then I'll talk about just a bit about where I went next, which is graduate school. After I graduated from UC Berkeley, I then went to the University of Texas at Austin, where I completed my master's and my PhD. And I completed my PhD this past spring. So this is new. So I'm super excited, but I wanted to take a shift in thinking about not necessarily this journey, this educational journey, but really more thinking about this social dynamics, the social world in these school settings, and the larger ramifications. Because my broader project is looking at, not only public schools, universities, neighborhood environments, whether it's low income or wealthy neighborhoods, as well as incorporating some archival work that's looking at sites of slavery, and bringing us to, this additional broader context in other sites such as hardcore pornography. And so what I just published, which is Race, Power, and the Pornographic Naughty Black Femme Schoolgirls and Interracial Pornography, Public Schools, and Policing Encounters. So that was my dissertation, y'all. And so I took that as a little piece and chunk of my broader life's work to look at, what are the ways that we can juxtapose hardcore interracial pornography scenes with real life state policing encounters. And this was this really high profile case, and some of you all may be familiar. Her name is Shakara, and she was in a school at South Carolina, and was arrested for allegedly pulling out a cell phone and allegedly not being on task. And in any situation, a police officer does not need to come in the classroom for any of those, whether it was presumption or real. And so I want to state that it doesn't matter what she did. I don't care if she stood on top of a table and started chanting her life story. There is no need for a police officer to come to the classroom. And so there was this long and huge, social media uproar about a police officer coming in and literally doing this very violent arrest of choking her, snatching her out of the seat, dragging her across the classroom, getting on top of her and pinning her down to arrest her. And, I wanted to think about this critical relationship between the co-construction of race, sex, the erotics, gender, sexuality, and the pornographic. And what does it mean when we think of these moments, when we think it's only moments of racialization? But what happens when we think of it as racial sexual and as sexual racial? And what does it mean when we think that there is an inextricable relationship between race, sex, the erotic, and the pornographic? And what I found in my work and what my job was to illuminate and to parse out that complicated relation. And so I was like, if the alleged general public is thinking that these, social constructions are disparate and separate, then what happens when we get some hardcore porn scene where this Black queer femme performs as the naughty Black femme schoolgirl? So this is what I call a racialized porn trope, and in this really interesting way to juxtapose these scenes so that we can see things that happen, what some might see as happening in the background or in the subtext or in this muted sense. We can see it in this more hardcore, to the front, in the forefront, to the conscious sense. And I really wanted to analyze this unconscious, racialized, pornographic BDSM that was structured across sites, and that is structured into the very system in process of anti-Black genocide in the US. And I thought that was really important, and I went in on that in my dissertation, and I dedicated that dissertation to those two scenes to really parse out and sift through what is this complicated relation. And so with my broader project and with book number one, I'm planning on 2 books, y'all. So book number 1, I'm thinking about this title in my head is On Erotic Mastery, Black Femmes, Pornography, and U.S. State Encounters. So that's a tentative title, y'all. That's a tentative title, but you heard it here first. And that's where I really go in to juxtapose different scenes of what I'm looking at with racialized porn tropes and this simultaneity of the pain, pleasure, and power. Like where does Black femmes, adults, and children use this, what I call erotic mastery, this turning to the creative and inner self in the erotic and pornographic dimension to demonstrate this type of mastery of the self. Like when we think of state forces constantly in attempts to display their own mastery, as Thea Hartman would say, displaying mastery. And so what happens when Black femmes are like, I'm the master? Like, I'm the fucking master. Like, there's no one who can master me because I'm my own master. And I find that really important. And I really am loving to work through this idea of erotic mastery, because I think that it can work in these moments, as well as kind of being able to generalize it and think more critically about other things. But I think I think about that idea. I'm also working with ideas of thinking about how, these scenes, whether it's in hardcore pornography or in circulating in social media and in real life, that they function as what I call anti-Black genocide porn. And so what does it mean when this offers literal sexual titillation and excitement and pleasure for anti-Black state forces. And so I'll go ahead and look at the implications of that. But I'm always tending to this pain, pleasure, and power, because I don't appreciate how Black femmes' autonomy and agency oftentimes get written out of these scenes in general public conversation. If it is, if the topic becomes about Black femmes, this is, it gets written out. And so I want to tend to that dynamic and all-encompassing complexity of that pain, pleasure, and power nexus. And briefly, I'll just say, with my book number 2, which I'm also working on simultaneously, is thinking about, what are Black femmes who grew up in hood environments in Oakland, what are the ways that they're navigating and negotiating this what I call hood genocide in Oakland? And just this is the predicament. I feel like it's too, how do you say, a euphemism to say gentrification. And so I say, let's say hood genocide. This is neighborhood genocide. So what happens when we reframe our language around these things? And what happens when we really think about how Black femmes in these hood environments are using erotic performance as a mode of survival, artistry, and pleasure? So once again, that nexus. And that's an ethnographic case study project that I'm working on. So that's me combining my Black feminist urban ethnography and also using my other media studies, critical porn studies, analyst framework on both projects across my time. Did I answer all questions? I'm trying to see.
You stayed every question and all the other questions that I didn't even know to ask. And I told y'all that I tried to warn y'all that the panel was about to be fire, but I feel like y'all didn't believe me. So now y'all know. Now y'all know we are in doctoral studies with the brilliant Dr. Peace and Love, with the soon to be Dr. Kerby and Dr. Zalika. And wow, thank you so much, Peace and Love. I just appreciate so much of what you said. And I love hearing about your trajectory, right? Your journey from undergraduate research to graduate studies and where you are now and the books that you're writing. It's just so inspiring and such a necessary model for us to see what is possible within academia. So thank you. And I just also want to shout out that Peace and Love was Kerby's high school mentor. And so I just love the intergenerational love on this panel, right? With Black women who done known each other since Black girlhood. And I appreciated you talking about your research about just like how did we get from our hood environments to UC Berkeley, and your focus on education. And I know that you were such a big role model in Kerby's life too. So I just love to see it, and thank you. And Kerby, we are going to close this question out with you. Let us know who you are, where are you from, a little bit about your work, and what does Black Women in Radical Media mean to you within the context of the work that you do?
Wow, what a fucking panel, what an event. My name is Kerby Lynch, and I am from the VALLEJO. Okay, I'm from Vallejo, California, particularly north side. I just particularly want to say thank you to Ree again for inviting me to speak on this panel. You're always reaching out to me, always thinking about highlighting me and putting me on a platform. And you are a visionary. You have given so many women a voice in academia. You've made space for us to feel seen and visible, because these institutions don't value our knowledge. And we've, again, had Black women die in academia. Barbara Christian, Vivek Clark, Joan Jordan, Audre Lorde, Pat Parker, so many Black women. Those are just the many I can name right now that have died prematurely doing this work. So appreciate what you're doing to really give us our flowers while we're living, because it is hard work. And I wanted to give Peace and Love her flowers while she's living, because she really is the reason for the season. I didn't really know I was going to go to college, kind of thinking about where I come from, Vallejo, Richmond, and, Black women's representation. I come from a strong family, a strong matriarchal family of Black women. I was raised by a single mother. My mother is also a shoe store owner. She's a woman entrepreneur, Black woman entrepreneur. My grandmother was a servant leader at St. John's Missionary Baptist Church, which is the largest church in the city of Richmond, California. She's the mother of the church. So, you know, in terms of representation, being a Black woman was a source of strength, a source of beauty. But also what I struggled with was a positive connection with my lesbian identity, and particularly with my masculine of center identity. So when I met Peace, you know, what I appreciated about Peace is that, you know, even in high school, you know, she was able to see like there was so much more to me, and really pushed me. We had conflicts. We were a part of a program called Experience Berkeley, where she served as my high school mentor. And I was a youngin' in high school, you know, getting her game on how to get into Berkeley. And, you know, I had a personal statement. It really wasn't good. And she was like, girl, like, can you like get it together? You know, like, you know, really, what is your story? You know, Peace was really upset. She was like, girl, what is your story? You know, at the time I was just trying to fit in, trying to get to college, trying to make my family proud. You know, but it was Peace through that process of being like, okay, who are you and what is your story? And I just wanted to give her flowers and say, like, you know, that is the intellectual environment I came into at Berkeley, was having such a strong mentor like Peace through that program, and also through the program of Bebe. I know Peace was never upset with me. I was her best one. Obviously, I'm her, you know, I'm her legacy. Look, honestly. So, but so when I got into Berkeley through Peace's guidance and mentorship, you know, again, I wanted to do everything like Peace. You know, Peace was like the one who didn't go to the party. She didn't even socialize, you know what I'm saying? Like that, you know, this girl always be in the library, right? And she had a roller backpack too. Remember you had a roller backpack, Peace? You remember that?
Okay, Kerby, I'm gonna have to interfere up in here. What's going on? You saying I'm upset with you? Once upon a time, I didn't go to no parties. Okay. I had a rolling backpack. Correction, it's a rolling flight bag. So I don't, you know, I'll be up in heels and stuff. So I'm like, I don't got time to be one of them families messing up their back and stuff. So you feel me? Rolling flight baggage.
Stop.
You know,
look, I'm just trying to set the scene.
Once upon a time,
I'm trying to set the stage that you were a person who was serious about your studies, serious about your scholarship, and someone being younger than you. You know, I took that seriously. And so, you know, I also did study African-American studies like Peace, and like everybody else on this call. Not saying I was a stand of Peace or nothing. Obviously, I'm not to get into my own thing. You know, obviously I have my own life. But, you know, again, that's just the Black women culture at Berkeley. The fact that we are a mirror of each other, and the fact that we're genuinely invested in creating and producing knowledge that is about our ultimate liberation. So really, I wanted to share with you all the research statement I wrote to get into the Bebe Clark Scholar Program, which is a program in the African American Studies department at Berkeley, where they take students, and it's a real intimate setting where they try to, like, you know, put you in the life of the mind, put you in the life of a scholar. And yeah, I just think this research statement is deep. Peace was in the program. And I was 18 years old when I wrote this statement. So I said, from my time here at Berkeley, my research will involve the intersections of race, class, and gender to study queer feminist theory, specifically Black queer women and their feminist thought. As a first year involving myself in feminist coursework, the Black queer women's narrative does not expand beyond Audre Lorde and June Jordan. My academic interest in African American studies is to go through periods of history and try to understand where the Black female queer thought existed, to further expand how Black queer women organized around major social movements. This first sparked me as a queer woman to know that my history was never presented to me from white or Black scholarship sources. I was starting to understand that being queer and involved in social justice is solely left to white queers to fight. As a young scholar, I was seeking validation that my identity could contribute something larger to the movement. As I investigated more into monumental periods in Black history, I want to understand how queer thought intersects with social, political, and economic disadvantages of Black people. I am also seeking to understand the emergence of bull dagger and stud in the Black community, and what politics were presented in these terms. Let me see how that's it. That's hella deep. My research would primarily be a resistance to erasure and how academia must embed integrity into many of their studies. I would also like to major in gender and women's studies to hold myself accountable to the works coming out the department and its relation to Black queer thought. I could do research and supplement it with a documentary or literary anthology. When thinking about what direction I want to go in, it all depends on what form of media is the most accessible to people outside the academy. Bebe A. Clark Institute would allow me to grow with the academy. Being a first year, I need guidance on how to be successful for when I am a fourth year seeking postgraduate opportunities to carry this work on. This institute would help me accomplish my goal of leaving Berkeley with a solid product to give back to my community. I believe research should be accessible. Anyone wanting to know on the issue should have access to seek it. The Institute would help me facilitate all the research for the betterment of Black queers and Black people. And that was me at 18, y'all. And I can say successfully I did that. You know, that's what I did. I did study where the hell stud came from, where bull dagger came from. And that's really, I took my education very seriously, and that's why I identify as an organic intellectual. I do not identify as a traditional intellectual. A lot of the research inquiry in academia is very self-serving. And I really do want to create research that is for the contribution to humanity. And to declare that and to state that that is, you know, Black radical women being alive and bold. So, you know, even for all y'all being producers of knowledge, you know, what you see and what you know about the world is valid, that just profess it, you know? So currently I'm a 5th year in my PhD program, but fuck it, you know, honestly, it's that connection to community. It's having access to archives and being able to contextualize, you know, our long Mayafa. You know, we are in a long-term genocide against our people. So we have to be able to respond to that in a real way.
Kerby, you just been brilliant since you was so young, and I'm just so moved and blown away. Thank you for sharing your younger self with us. Thank you for sharing your vision with us and the intentionality with which you have moved through your academic and intellectual journey. I so appreciate that. Whew, I'm so inspired by y'all. Y'all are just giving me hope. I'm gonna go back and watch this when I'm feeling discouraged as I'm dissertating and just get reminded that it's possible, because y'all are doing it and y'all are models of what's possible. So thank you. Whew, thank you so much. So I want to dive into this next question. We're gonna get into it, y'all. We're gonna get into really the meat of what we've been doing in this course, particularly with this section. We've been talking about Black girl disrespectability and all the ways that Black women disrespect the systems and the structures that have been set up to harm us and to prevent us from our full liberation. And so I want us to talk a little bit about respectability politics. If we can, you know, define it. What is respectability politics? How does it police hood girl aesthetics and sexual autonomy? What does disrespectability politics invite us into, particularly for those of us who are hood girls, queer femmes, trans women, and dyke feminists, as Brax proudly proclaimed herself to be? And I just want to shout out to Brax. Braxton was a beloved member of our Black Women Healing community who transitioned November 2nd, 2020. And so I'm so honored to highlight Braxton on my syllabus. My students have been studying her this past week, and we are bringing Braxton's energy into this space. And her Instagram name is Dyke Brax. And so she was really adamant about centering dykeism. And so we'll get into that some too, but I really just want to think about disrespectability. We have Braxton's picture next to this whole section on the syllabus to affirm what disrespectability is and what it means, what it looks and feels like, for us to be leaning into our unapologetic selves without giving fucks. So Zalika, we're gonna start back with you. Let us know about disrespectability, politics, and what is it inviting us into in regards to our liberation. You on mute, sis, but we see you. We know you dropping wisdom.
So I said I'm ready this time. So you got me, but I wasn't ready because it was on mute. So here we go. Respectability, I do think of it in a few ways. On one hand, I think a lot about what Dr. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham was doing with righteous discontent. I feel like one of the things that happens with respectability, or in this case, the politics of respectability, is that when we have the discourses, I think during the Black Lives Matter period, and I guess as we are in a post-BLM period, we've kind of changed or evolved the definition or our understandings of it over time. But when I think of what Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham was talking about, I didn't necessarily see it as something, or she was talking about like, you know, an upper class. I saw her talking about working class Black women. It was a tactic more or less of survival for those populations in the earliest part of the 20th century. And I think for those reasons, I understand methodologically, you know, why so that sort of performance was necessary. You have Darlene Clark Hines that talks about the cultures of dissemblance and how important it was for Black women who were not only just being terrorized by white men and white supremacists, but were even being terrorized by Black men of their own communities as well. So this sort of obfuscation of your sexuality and cloaking of it was another method. It was another device to protect yourself. But now what's happened is, you know, a lot has happened over time and what we understand to be respectability. So, you know, you hear discourses about sagging and bonnets, you know, and the whole nine. But I think we know now from history, we know experientially what does and what does not work. In this instance, and I think for particular Black folk who are living even more so on the margins, there are certain ways of being that we are not able to hide, not able to cloak. And as a result, there is this disrespectability that happens. Now, one could argue maybe it could be a fugitive practice. One could argue that it might be a radical practice, or one might even be able to argue that with all of these understandings of Black being, that it might be a practice that doesn't really concern itself about whether or not it's trying to do something the complete opposite. They're just being themselves. So maybe it may not be an act of resistance, but it's just a way of being. That's who they are. And if it disrupts people, then so be it. So I think, as I think through, like I said, respectability, these are the veins that I'm thinking about it. But as I think through disrespectability, I think we're in an interesting time where disrespectability, and for those of you who know me, you'll know that I talk about this often, that disrespectability has become a neoliberal project for some. And what I mean by that is that there is a particular way where people are actually using the respectable sentiments to posit as a disrespectability. So, you know, no shade, you know, there are ideations and theorizations that some of us as Black feminist scholars have placed forth that is more so about what meets the eye and the aesthetics, as opposed to the literal practice or the acknowledgement of particular marginalized communities. So when you have theories that are developed through Love and Hip Hop, which is a scripted series, as opposed to a theory that looks at the community, that looks at what it means to be being or non-being in a Black sense, or a theory that does not engage the ontology or sociality or relationality of what it means to be Black and different or other. You know, therein lies a neoliberal issue where people seek to capitalize off of those things. So we see it musically, we see it through television and film. And as a result, the people who are closest to those margins actually suffer more for those reasons. They suffer financially, and they also suffer as they are targets of material violences, i.e. the recent Dave Chappelle, you know, special or something like that.
Thank you so much, sis. I hella appreciate just the nuance. You know, I really appreciate the nuance. We're going to take it to Dr. Peace and Love, and then we're going to close out this question with Kerby.
Yeah, thank you so much, Z, for that and providing context. I did want to say, so I'm thinking about, you know, in my entry of thinking about critical porn studies, and what I feel particularly about Black feminist scholars who are interested in looking at pornography in a critical way, the ways that it can be pleasurable, the ways that it can be painful, the ways that it can challenge, manipulate, or transform these types of structural systems of anti-Blackness. And I think that with these particular scholars, who I'm sure that we'll continue to talk about over the course of this conversation, is someone like Murray Miller-Young, Jennifer Nash, and Ariana Cruz, who are three key people in critical Black feminist porn studies, which is how I refer to it in thinking about what are the ways that we can allow Black feminine figures to have nuance and complexity and flexibility, like emotional flexibility, emotional range, a range in beingness, you know, and not just being stuck in this very historical tropic figure of whatever anti-Black forces and structures in peoples have project onto us at any given point in time. And so when I think about my entry into those conversations, it really enabled me to see, especially Miller-Young's conversation on what she calls hoe theory, which is she specifically is thinking through what does it mean for Black women who are in, you know, ghetto porn, which is, you know, termed as ghetto porn, but these are places where you set the scene to be in a hood environment and it goes down, and these tropes form and we get to see them on screen, and we also see how Black women's bodies are so-called ghettoized in these spaces. So whether these Black feminine figures come from the hood or not, they are oftentimes in the porn industry positioned as or relegated. So it's not embarrassing to be in ghetto porn, let me just say that. But the fact of always already being relegated to the positionality of ghetto porn says something about what it means for us to think about the Black feminine figure as always already ghetto, always already hood, always already this, that, and the third, when we of course come from an array of class backgrounds and cultural backgrounds. But I want to pause it there, and I want to say that this important dynamic that she's highlighting, I don't want to get into the details of this theory, but the crux of it is just allowing for Black feminine figures in this space to embrace their identity, those who are from hood environments, and those, I'm thinking about the particular porn star named Pinky. And so some from Oakland may remember her, but Pinky was huge when I was growing up. And so like just to see her in a book, number one, was like, wow. And then number two, to see how she was painted in this type of dynamic way, to think of her as a cultural producer, you know? And so it even in my own journey of thinking of, you know, my own sexual identity and my own, the ways that we think of sexual cultural practices in hood environments, it's like, wow, we really need to open up the definitions in the dynamics and the grace that we give Black feminine figures and Black people in general in these spaces that, you know, just to echo Z a bit, it's not even really about disrespecting or, you know, creating this type of disrespectability politics on purpose per se, but that is just a mode of being. It's a way of living, in that those types of texts for me in that field of study particularly opened up this huge conversation that was being not opened in the discussions of mainstream Black studies, in Black sexuality studies, and in, you know, this new growing field of Black porn studies, critical Black feminist porn studies, and that, you know, that those types of conversations are so important into thinking about how can we broaden these conversations to just allow for the space, to open up for the space for this nuanceness in performing however we come, in being able to be however we are. Because, you know, I honestly felt that when in my own personal lived experience after reading those types of conversations, it made me be able to acknowledge certain inclinations in my own day-to-day practices to be like, you know, why am I shying away from this, or why am I shying away from that? And why is there an antagonism against twerking? Why is there an antagonism against, you know, all of these Black diasporic practices that we develop that are interestingly in mainstream conversations and practices dislodged and disconnected from how that's actually part of our Black diasporic ways and epistemologies and practices and meaning-making processes that we come to know ourselves. And so I'm thinking of a scholar named Aria S. Holiday, who's thinking about, you know, what are the ways that twerking enables us to use our bodies as ways of knowing, as remembering ourselves, our cultural, spiritual, ethnic, and so forth. How can we use our bodies for that? And so, of course, just in general conversations, we can think about twerking as one of those dances that they try and say Black girls look ghetto doing, or this, that, and the third. And it's just like, wait a minute, it's way more dynamic than that. It's way more pleasure, power, and purpose being expressed in those moments. And so I think that it's really if I am to give a moral to this story, is that I think it's really about thinking and breaking and unlearning the ways that we go about seeing who's acceptable in society and who's not, so that we can have that broad spectrum of Black queerness, Blackness, and, you know, Black feminists, Black dykeness, and Black transness, and to not be confined to those kind of tropic figures that prevent us from being the wide-ranging dynamic people that we are. And I'll stop it there.
Okay, thank you so much, sis. And we're gonna come to Kerby to close us out on this question.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, such an important question. I thank Zalika and Dr. Peace and Love for breaking that down, because it's very, very intense to really sit and just sit with the complexity of our dehumanization and our subjugation. Shout out to Saidiya Hartman's work, Scenes of Subjection. You know, we are a people who were stolen off the shores of Africa and placed here in this wretched land. And so that's respectability politics. You know, how do we still exist in this empire after slavery? You know, slavery and the ending of it, we weren't never really meant to survive this long. The plan was total genocide and total annihilation after for the Reconstruction era. You know, that's why we had slavery, lynchings, burnings, mutilations, just the whole Reconstruction era and racial terrorism tells you all you need to know about respectability politics. You stay your ass in line in order to survive and live. And so Yeah, just to keep it short, I actually have a book out that I independently published. It's called The Philosophy of Black Insurgency. It's on Amazon now. I put that bitch up there, so go buy that shit. And I also got an ebook. Check it out, butchbrood.com. And actually there's some essays in there that I wrote in undergrad. So my undergraduate, again, I told you that's what I set out on and when I was 18. And so for my undergraduate work, I traveled to South Africa and I went through a lot of archives out there. And I actually started to like see the origin of our dehumanization and subjection there. Started to learn about Sarah Bartman, you know, Venus Hottentot. Started to learn about just how the African woman was gazed upon and kind of targeted for captivity. That when they did send Black men to the New World, they did not survive. That they actually had to go back to Africa and get the woman to fulfill the work. So those are all of the things that still exist in our society today. And really my approach as a scholar has been to really study particularly masculine of center Black women who are considered studs, AGs, considered butch, and how those women don't really get a voice. And the reason why they don't get a voice is because there's a lot going on behind the scenes. When I started to really learn my history, I started to learn about the history of sexology, started to learn about the institutional gaze that's been put on Black women throughout like the past 500 years. And so even thinking about respectability politics and like why we don't highlight Black masculine women, because if you really knew what our history has been, like it would really disturb you that prison culture, particularly for women, is all designed to contain the influence of the Black lesbian woman onto other prisoners. You know, that's where even the term stud comes from. It's a prison term from the 1930s. And so when we really do understand our history, it's so attached to institutions and this legacy of domination that when we're thinking about respectability, we have to like think about that we're still living in this place that stole us. And so when I look at Black women who are studs, who are butch, who are dyke, like me, you know, I definitely have taken out queer from my vocabulary because queer, even from its like origin and it's like emergence in the 1990s came from these white people feeling all liberated and shit about their alternative lifestyles. But what about, you know, the hood girl who don't have access to that terminology? And that was kind of what happened when I got to Berkeley. Like, I didn't motherfucking say pronouns and shit, and motherfuckers thought I was so fucking backwards and shit. I'm like, bitch, the fuck, all I know is that I'm a dyke, you know? And you know, and just the ways those respectability politics don't allow Black people to exist within queerness or whatever, or exist in the LGBT community comfortably. So what I just like to think about in my work is like how a lot of Black folks just don't fit in nowhere. We don't fit in the Black community. We don't fit in alternative communities. We don't really fit in. And that goes back to the fundamental point about global anti-Blackness. We're not meant to live. And so once we realize that, we do need to, you know, think about what's the difference between the erotic and the pornographic. You know, how do we reclaim joy? How do we reclaim pleasure? You know, that's what we are striving for. And that's what respectability politics does not allow us to discover or engage in. Respectability politics is how do I assimilate and align with the empire so I can survive? And, you know, I think what Zalika and Dr. Peace are bringing up are people who strategically use deviance as a form of resistance. So let's just think about that, because this empire got to end.
Oh my God, y'all is just so brilliant. My head is like, wow. Thank you so much, Kerby. Thank y'all. We're gonna come back to Dr. Peace and Love to talk a little bit about erotic mastery, which you coin in your work. And I want to ask you a little bit about this term. What does it mean? How do you engage it? And how does it help you to think about Black queer femme sexual agency within and beyond your work? And how has it helped you to understand Oakland differently? You know, my students is right in the town. So help them to like look at the town a little bit different through the lens of your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just feel like I'm just again, so honored to be here. Such rich and wealthy conversations here. And thinking about erotic mastery, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, and gave a brief definition. So I'm thinking about, just to go a bit more in depth, is, so one, erotic mastery, the way that I see this kind of taking formation is one having to reconceptualize the erotic for us. And a lot of foundational work, of course, is done by Audre Lorde, who was thinking about what are the ways that the erotic have been conflated and confused with the pornographic, and what are the ways that, so this is from Audre Lorde's conversation, what are the ways that the erotic is a life force energy, this creative force within us that when reclaimed, is by nature that will be rebelling against this discriminatory system. And so much of the conversations on the erotic has been, kind of building much of the erotic in Black feminism, in Black studies. I want to say that I'm narrowing this conversation on the erotic. And so much of the conversation has been building on Audre Lorde's work and thinking through the erotic from that point of frame. But there was this other scholar in a rise of scholarship who were interested in complicating this notion of the erotic and kind of broadening it to, once again, think about what critical Black feminist porn scholars are talking about, as well as Black sexuality studies scholars are saying. And one in particular, well, both in particular are Ariana Cruz, who's specifically in porn studies, and Lamonda Horton Stallings, who has this really important text called Funk the Erotic. And so precisely with that, title, Funk the Erotic, so like what happens when you funk the erotic? What happens when you copulate with it, is what they say. And so what happens when we think about the ways that we can also turn to an array of Black sexuality cultures and Black sexual cultures and see the revolutionary potential of those as social movements. And so that's thinking about what we just talked about, deviancy and disrespectability as just an equivalent in as an important Black sexual culture and politics, just as those who practice, more so on Black respectability politics and spectrum. And so really thinking about it on a spectrum and complicating these notions of the erotic to say that, the erotic, as Audre Lorde frames it, is really important. And that can also be included in this conversation. But with the tradition of scholars like Horton Stallings, they're also interested in thinking about what happens when we say that the erotic can also be inclusive of this creative life force energy within us, but also the pornographic. And what happens when we turn to the pornographic to see and claim our own power, and that it doesn't always have to be written within the context and structure of anti-Blackness. And that, whether it is and whether it's not, those navigating and negotiating strategies or what brings dimension to Blackness and sexuality in the multidimensional ways that they exist and that we exist. And so they also include and add nuance to this conversation by thinking about funk, and particularly funk studies. And so what does it mean when we think about the multidimensionality, the multisensory experience of the erotic, from its feeling, its taste, its touch, its spiritual, its energy, it's that in the range of its form. And so when I think about the erotic, I truly do think of it in this way that complicates it and expands as the creative, this life force energy, this erotic, this sexual, and this pornographic. And so when I'm particularly naming what is erotic mastery in these moments that I'm examining in these juxtaposed scenes of Skin Diamond, who performed as what I've called the naughty Black femme schoolgirl in this naughty schoolgirl scene, what does her erotic performance look like? And what is Shakara, who was in a public high school classroom being brutally arrested, or even before this build up to the moment, what does her erotic mastery in these very small moments look like in that real life state policing encounter? And so I go in with the frame to say, when we are navigating a US civil society that was founded and operates on this coercive form of racialized pornographic BDSM, we have to see the moments where you're gonna always already be contesting and navigating and negotiating that particular and very structure. And so whether our common sense encourages us to say like, wait a minute, Shakara's reaction was not, how could it be pornographic, or how could it be erotic being invoked? But when we think about it within the frame of like, wait a minute, this is a structure that we're operating in. So because we're in this structure that's at large, this umbrella that we're operating in, that strategy is always already gonna be shaped by those particular social forces in social structures and constructs. And so I say all of that to say that when and also to give a bit more tangible example is thinking about Skin Diamond in these scenes, like what happens when she is supposed to be the naughty schoolgirl and race is allegedly not implicated, but race is always, it's the racial sexual is always implicated. So we can't allow the storyline to be foreclosed with that narrative. And so what happens when she's the naughty Black femme schoolgirl? And the title of the actual scene is Naughty Skin Diamond Gets Punished by Getting Fucked Hard. And so I was like, the title right there, that is it. That is the analysis. That is what happens when we think about naughty Black femmes being either socially, literally, or gesturally fucked on screen and off screen. And what does it mean? Why is there always a presumption of that we can fuck Black femmes hard with no permission included? And so with or without, it's important to have that permission, of course. And so I'll always, kind of tread that line between the coercion and consensual. And so because I think of these moments as treading some very sensitive grounds, I'm like, what are these eclipses? What are these entries, these moments where Black femmes are like, you thought you was my master? Bitch, I'm my master. And so like those moments where you're like, she identifies, in one interview, she talks about feeling like she's a sexual athlete. And so what do we think about that physical, that kind of physical skill set, adeptness, being very skillful in advanced and developed and precise and very intentful with how to go about practicing sex. And what does it mean to be on screen for that type of mastery to show on screen? So whether she's doing these sexual positions where we gain a sense of, number one, it's hard to capture anyone doing a sexual position and maintaining sexiness. And so we have to clap it up for that regards. And so, which is she's won so many awards. She's a well-renowned, she's a former porn star now, and she got more into the music industry, but she won a lot of awards from places that are considered, the Oscars of porn. And so people have formally recognized her erotic and pornographic mastery. But just these moments of when she's interacting in scripts in kind of making these unsaid moments of inside jokes. And what does it mean for a Black femme spectator or analyst to be watching it and to be able to catch those? Because I think there were some things that I caught that others who were, non-Black femme, non-Black audience members may not have caught. But I was interested in paying very close attention to these small moments where we can see her making this outside gesture and inside joke to those who might share an identity with her, or maybe doing those sexual positions or employing ecstatic moans that just allows audience members to live vicariously through her. And so in the sexual scene, in the porn scene, that's the ways that I'm thinking about erotic mastery, that we have to think about not just that formal script that she was, written in contracts to do, but what is the way that she made it her own and toyed with that trope and toyed with it, rejected it, and transformed it in her own way, to think about the naughty Black femme schoolgirl. And when I think about Shakara and her demonstration of erotic mastery, the narrative is that she resisted getting out of her seat, and that early on, before this whole buildup, the math teacher, a white math teacher, told her to give him her phone because she's playing with it or whatever the case, and that she's distracted from doing classwork. And then she, upon the first instruction, she put it away. And so that was it. But she said, according to her in the police report, it was that she said that she was looking down on her lap, but the teacher accused her again of looking and playing with her phone. And she said, I don't even have my phone. I'm just literally looking down at my hands. And so no, she's not leaving. It's like, okay, so I'm gonna call the administrator and I'm gonna call the police. And so eventually both of them come there and they both, demand that she leaves the classroom for supposedly playing with her phone. Like I said, I wanna remind you all that whether she was playing with her phone or standing on the table, it does not matter. If you are Black, if you are Black, those are the ways that Blackness is policed, not only in school, but across, US civil society. And so there's always already gonna be this presumption that Blackness needs to be punished. Blackness is the culpable, criminal agent, and so I don't want you all to think that I'm giving a reason for, why it shouldn't have taken place or why it, should or should not. I'm like, in any direction, it should not have. And so I just want to make that clear, because people constantly kind of get in these ways of like, well, the Black person did this, they did that. Maybe the punishment was permissible. No, that's not. That never should be the case. But we have these pornographic anti-Black logics that we continue to be subjected to. And it even shapes the way that we see, whether we see or think about what is acceptable in these types of moments of encountering police. But I'll just wrap up and say that, long story short, with Shakara's erotic mastery is thinking about how she, even in that moment, resisted, and to say, no, I'm not gonna get up, to the teacher, to the administrator, to the police officer, and how much strength and inner work and courage does it take for a young Black girl who was around 16 years old to take that particular stance against a state force. And even with that, there was also some circulation about her hitting the police officer back in self-defense when he was aiming to choke her and grab her. And so, like, what are these moments where Black girls, and spelled with the X, Black girls are making these really rebellious and so-called unruly and these very moves of self-defense that we are not expected to make. Like, we're not expected to have self-defense, as Connie one reminds us. When Black girls in school environments practice self-defense, we are the ones who are criminalized. We are seen as the one who transgressed. And so what does it mean to really take those modes of defending ourselves just as a way of protection of the self, because no one else will protect us, that when we do that, we're punished even harder. Or as Skin Diamond's scene revealed, fucked hard, and that's the form of getting punished. And so I think of those as like, what are those ways that across those scenes, we can think about Black femme figures, adult and children, are kind of drawn on that notion of erotic mastery to own that sense of self, despite state forces attempting to play the role of master.
Wow, thank you so much, sis. And I just want to name that Peace and Love and Zalika both are theorizing so intensely, y'all, that they done created terminologies, okay? They are creators of theories, right? So you are looking at some brilliant Black women. I'm saying this for my students, right? For y'all to see that like these Black women are out here creating theories that we will be able to read about more soon. So thank y'all. I want to go next to Zalika's John theory and talk to us a little bit about John theory, what it means, and how does it help you to think through shame, desire, and pleasure while celebrating the everyday round the wayness of Philly Johns, and how do you center your own lived experience in your art and in your research practice? And thank you again, peace and love, for that brilliant response. Zalika, we ready for it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peace and Love. And thank you, Reela, as well, for just asking me this question. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to begin at least with a bit of a description of John theory, as it's something that's still a work in progress. And then what I'll try to do is also just insert my own positionality as well, so that you all can have an understanding. The discourse of Black geographies administered through sonics and the word violence serve as a rationale for how I considered the Mid-Atlantic Black sonic of the John. My understandings of the term John began during the mid to late 1990s. I understood the John as a gesture, way of being in vocalic performance during the early aughts. However, I interrogate the John in my work through its Black Philadelphian lingual etymology. The sonic performance interlocks with flesh. And I'm going to talk a little bit about flesh later. Now, with understandings of an entanglement of violence and pleasure, which demonstrates through the gesture of grammar, the vocalic expressions of words such as John informs Black local being. Through the vocalic gesture of rumor, I talk a lot about how hearsay is significant to the strictures that formulate what I talk about as the bottom in my work. And I use Toni Morrison's conception of the bottom in Sula as a way for understanding how the John is actually made or created. And I actually use constructions of what we know as the Black bottom in Philly to also be in discourse and dialogue with Toni Morrison's bottom. So what I do is I interrogate how the John is made, and it emerges from this moralistic, hierarchical, fleshy fissure through what we know as the bottom, or what I understand as the bottom. So as a noun, it formulates into a sexual gesture, an adjective that connotes identity, experience, and desirability. For example, the expression "that's a bad joint" could be a gesture of warning, an expression of negative experience, or or idea or place. However, it can also mean that someone is considered sexually desirable. In tandem with the genderless nature of the John, it can also transmute into a term that identifies who said it to be a desirable woman, or a person who utilizes she, her, they, them pronouns. The John speaks to the sexual geography of the body that touches what I know as the otherwise or the elsewhere. The John is ungendered and often feminine, parentheses around femme, is an obfuscation of Black geography. So I argue that the John begins at the bottom. The John has this antagonistic relationship with the bottom, because sometimes the John may not actually want to be at the bottom. There may be a struggle to accept. So they may accept, reject, or refute this place. And this relationship is often demonstrated through the performance and gesture of rumor as well. So the John appears fleshy, and as a Mid-Atlantic performance, it denotes belonging, secrecy, and exclusion. Flesh can materialize itself as composites of fat, flesh, tissue, and muscle held beneath and between skin and bones. However, flesh through the psychic lends itself to a kind of ontological secrecy and excess. The flesh is often further actualized through rumor and hearsay. Rumors keep things going, and they loom and haunt over the John's identity. The rumor is also an obfuscation of memory and a method of constructing the other, as is the John. So in acting like a John or the John, there is a carcerality to this function as it polices certain identity expressions, ways of being, and speculation of both. It no longer matters within the identity of the John who exactly they are to those who spread the rumors about them. It is about the memory of who they become to be. So that is the conceptualization of the John in that instance. So going deeper, this theory speaks to a Black intracommunal logic of relationality and absence. This is a Black theory that names itself from within, and it urges the home to call a thing, to call a place, and a person. John theory calls on itself. It disrupts and haunts itself in its own tracks through analytics of Black gender and sexuality. So what I did in a performance to really cap it off or inaugurate it, it was a visual, audio, textual reading of the racial and sexual landscape of the Philadelphia Black femme. So as an experimental performance piece comprised of two different series, the Shame Study, which was in 2018, and the Visual Body Journal, which was in 2019, John Theory, A Bodily Geographic Tour, was a three-part autoethnographic performance. The visual performances, were captured and ruptured into three scenes: West Oak Lane, Philly Travels, a Philadelphian grammatical geography of a Black femme, the Grammar Visual Body Journal, and its counterpart, Person, Place, Thing, which was performed in 2020. And then the audio within it consisted of two voices, which belonged to my deceased mother, Leslie McCoy, who passed on in 2015, and also my own voice. So the recurring hums that are heard throughout this video, throughout this sonic, disturbs myself as a Black femme. And in turn, I believe that the Black femme disturbs every effort to erase and dismember them as well. So for me, the charge is often for the John to haunt more and haunt more frequently, which is an extension of how I'm reading the deviant Black femme overall. So what I do is, in terms of flesh, I draw on Horton Spiller's theorization of the 0 degree of social conceptualization of Black people's bodies and flesh. And I look at Fred Moten's disavowal of the distinction between the human and thingly nature of Black people. So instead of stating that, I think, we're living in a period of time where there are a lot of theories that are at large, and there are some theories that some people do not agree with. There are discourses also of social death. So, we know that we live in this very totalizing anti-Black world. And we also live in a world that seeks to dehumanize folk. So we know in the context of the transatlantic slave trade that Black people have a very difficult and contentious relationship to the category human, itself. So as a result, it's not that Black people pre-coloniality did not have its own description for what it meant to be human, but it is that because of this project of Western expansion, that Black people were no longer afforded this particular category because this genre changed how we know and understand the human in this conception. So here goes this idea of accepting, rejecting, and refuting once again. You can either accept it, reject it, or refute it. My work actually chooses to do none of those things. It actually is just letting it play as is. In part, maybe I do accept it. But the other part of me is accepting that there might be some sort of counter-humanity operating here. The other part of me recognizes there's a narrative and an ontology of personhood that might be acting here, a species in a sense. And then the other part of me is also very much aware of the thingly nature of what happens when the Western world starts to create things. And maybe within this thingification, there is further possibility. So Spillers defines the flesh as a 0 degree of social conceptualization that does not escape concealment, where she talks about these reflexes of iconography. So the flesh is not legible to the person who seeks to thingify the body. So as people create their own narratives, their rumors, their own stories about the Black female body in this instance, or even perhaps the male body. There is another writing, but it's a type of writing that may not be recognized by that spectator, which is why my work talks by and large about spectators. So the flesh signifies the objectified being subjecthood, which for the Black being or object is often misrecognized, but it's that misrecognition that also can birth a type of possibility. So this is why the John as theoretical framework speaks to that embodiment, experience, and visuality of the Black femme that's cast off as a gendered and sexual other from an already othered community, such as Black folk. So I argue the John as a Black, at times it could be affirmative femme figure who understands the complexities of their sexual subjecthood and subjectivity through shaming cultures, which is why in turn, in some way, there has to be an embrace of the effective nature of their relationship to others who may not actually even see them as person or as human within their own class of otherness of Black people. And so I think one of the things that I tried to arrive at within my project with this John theory and with the other sections in each chapter, it's devised between notions of sexual shame, pleasure, and desirability. And desirability is just going to be an extension of the other ways that we can look at place, whether it be digital archives or digital publics as a place, or whether it be our material or lived engagements as a form of place that can establish how we're able to look at excess and look at people who may have a different understanding of what it means to be, even if it's through a culture that says that's way too much. You need to calm the fuck down a little bit.
Whew, thank you so much, Z, for all that fire. We are going to close out our question asking section of the panel with a question for Kerby, and then we are going to open up for a few audience Q&A. So Kerby, talk to us a little bit about your work with the Bay Area Lesbian Archive, and talk to us a little bit about Brax and how she is expanding traditional understandings of lesbianism and how the archive narrates these sorts of genealogies of radical lesbian feminism.
Yes. Well, wow. Again, the panel is amazing. A lot of notes being taken over here. Yeah, just good to be in this discourse. Because currently I serve as a community researcher. So I'm actually transitioned out of academia. I do a lot of grassroots community engagement work and nonprofits to make sure that, things are going well for our people, because when we're thinking about services and access to services, that is our life source too, so thinking about a representation is very, very critical, because that actually translates real life, how people feel comfortable getting access to services and living their full life. So, what we're thinking about here in terms of how people are being represented, showing up in the erotic, this also translates directly to our mental health, to our access to services, to access to social services without bias. So, what we do in academia and what we do in Black studies is so relevant to saving our people and to being responsive to the times we live in. So I just want to say I appreciate all of what everybody's bringing on this panel, because it's urgent. Our healing is urgent because, again, we are in the Mayafa, the ongoing genocide of our people. And again, that's why archives are very critical too, to document our state, our beingness. And so what I can say about archives and how I arrived at them is, again, going back to where I was as a young researcher, trying to figure out methods and trying to figure out, okay, what is the story I'm trying to tell and how am I trying to tell it? I didn't really want to do interviews, and I didn't really want to do present day engagement, because I kind of knew in my spirit that these were kind of long-standing historical issues, that nothing really is new under the sun. Everything is kind of a reincarnation or a reproduction of some very long-standing patterns. And so that's what the archive allows you to do. It allows you to sit, look, and see what's similar in present day, and be able to make continuum, be able to make connections. And so when I'm thinking about my work with the Bay Area Lesbian Archives, which was led by my dear comrade who passed away, Lynn Keller, my elder, you know, she started this archive because she saw how deeply Black women were erased from the Bay Area queer legacy. She's like, you know, I was fortunate enough to hang around Black elders and Black OGs in the Bay Area who were there, you know, who were at Compton's cafeteria, you know, who were at Stonewall. Like, you know, these are all Black revolutions at the core. And so Lynn Keller started the Bay Area Lesbian Archives as a Black lesbian feminist, to remind people of the queer history in the Bay Area is very much so a lesbian history. And also to remind people that our queer history is very much a Black history as well. And she was able to kind of show me how Black lesbian feminists were at the origin of a lot, but we were erased from history. A lot of people don't know that Child Protective Services used to really hunt Black lesbians in the 1970s. You know, there'd be a lot of discourses about Black mothers being unfit. You know, there would be kind of like these parenting cooperatives of Black women who were being independent in the 1970s, and Child Protective Services demonized these Black women as lesbians, and that qualified them to get their children taken away. So when we're thinking about the archives and thinking about narratives, I wouldn't have never known that. That's not no history book. That's not no peer-reviewed academic journal. But that was in the oral histories in the Bay Area Lesbian Archive. That was in the preservation of zines from that time period, where you have Black women speaking about their experiences in the system. You know, there is a archival text called the Black Lesbian Newsletter, which was a kind of a publication in the 1980s that was based out of Berkeley. And Berkeley was a huge site for the crack epidemic. And a lot of Black lesbians were reflecting on how crack was impacting the Black community in general. You ain't got no peer-reviewed academic journal about the crack epidemic and the impacts that it had in Berkeley, California. You don't. So the archive is important to be able to understand our history and be able to recover history and literally have an understanding of what's not being discussed today, you know, because a lot of people are pretending not to know what's up. It's like, girl, you've been on what's up. You're actually the person who created what's up. So, you know, let's address it. And that's what archives are able to do. And so if you're a student, you know, definitely think about the archive as a place to start your research inquiry. I started my research inquiry at the Bancroft Library, at the GLBT Historical Society. I even interned at the Schomburg Center for Black Culture. You know, and archives are all flawed. What you'll start to find is that there's a priority system in archives. Not all histories matter. And so it's up to you as a researcher to really understand what you want to find out and what it is that you want to discover about our history and bring it out. And that's why I love just the legacy of Black lesbians and Black feminists who are in the archives, who are creating these histories. You know, even think about Sadia Hartman, you know, think about Wayward Lives, you know, think about all of her creative reinterpretation of history. That's how we bring humanization to Black women, because that's just the power of cultural production. And that's been the work of cultural production. It's been us humanizing ourselves, right? Like, you know, we are not asking for permission in our cultural production, in our music, in our dance, in our speech. You know, we being fully African in the production of culture. And so that's what is cool about archives and being able to tell our history through those kind of archival engagements. And so that's why even thinking about Brax and her work is so important, because, you know, yes, it's 2020, but let's say in 2040, Brax will be an artifact to explain what's happening in 2020. You know, the artifact of her being is going to be an expression of the point that Black folks were becoming liberated real time with their sexuality. That is what Brax will represent in the archive, you know, historically, years from now. And so really the cool part about Brax and her work and just the work of radical lesbian feminism is that this is giving content to decolonization, literally, even Brax and her fluidity, like literally that is decolonization. Her refusing to fit into a box, her being expressive, her experimenting with different forms, that is decolonization real time. And so that's what is important about our work, to preserve Black women's cultural work, because we'll be able to read into how they were resisting in their particular time periods. So in my book, if you get it, The Philosophy of Black Insurgency, I did this also with Ma Rainey. In her text, Prove It On Me Blues, she had like a huge song called Prove It On Me Blues, which was a whole song about her dissing the police after they had raided her apartment. And she made a song about how you niggas ain't gonna arrest me again because I ain't gonna be out with my shit. That was a really popular song back then. It was a mainstream song, but that's literally an archive of Black lesbian criminality, and then Brax and her work will be understood as an archive of Black lesbian freedom. And that's the work of us as scholars to read into what remains.
Wow, so beautiful, so powerful. Whew, thank y'all for all of this fire. Now we are going to open it up for audience Q&A. I just want to see some hands. If any folks have questions, things you want to ask, things you want to know. Okay, Alexis, kick us off, sis. And you can feel free to direct your question to any one person or just to the whole panel. I am going to try to get us out here by 7:35. So just keep that in mind, panelists, when y'all responding. Okay, go ahead, sis.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for this wonderful evening and all y'all brilliance. I'm Alexis. I am a Philly John and I'm a doctoral candidate from Emory. So I'm feeling very loved on. And I think I asked that question. My question comes from like holding these identities, I guess. And Z, you said something about like being a vessel, allowing yourself to be a vessel for this work. And I think that from all of y'all answers, like it's so deeply entrenched, like this happens in your body, on your body. And this shit is taxing and tiring anyway. And so I just really would love to hear y'all talk about how you sustain yourselves. How are you moving through? And for Dr. Peace and Love, how you got to the, other side, because, I am in the very beginning stages of dissertating and thinking of myself in doing this as being vessel in part. And like, there is something beyond just academic that is happening as I'm moving through this. So I would love to hear y'all talk about like, how do y'all take care of yourselves? How do you deal with being vessel? Like, that's hard. How do you deal with all of these things happening on your body as you also are like offering your brilliance and your intellectual sort of prowess to it?
Thank you so much for that question, Boo. And panelists, I'm gonna ask if y'all could keep it to like a minute and a half because we got some other questions. But whoever want to dive in, thank you.
Thank you so much. Alexis, correct? Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I remember Ree at the beginning of the intro was laughing about the fun fact that I offered, but like real life, that's why I offered that fun fact, because I truly do identify as an intergalactic thinker, writer, and creative. And I truly enjoy mastering visual arts, music, poetry, and performance, because that's life for me. That's literally life. And that enables me to continue and to have continued throughout my journey. Like while I'm writing, theses or on the journey to producing a book, like I'm always like, wait, what's my next mixtape? My underground mixtape. What's my next, song that I'm producing? What's my next visual portrait that I'm drawing? Like, what is my next performance? What is this create? Once again, looking at the inner work, and really ensuring that I do. I know this is a buzzword now, but self-care. Really dependent on myself for self-care in meditation and creative endeavors to really sustain and center myself and you know, be the best that I can be and tread along this journey, because it's not easy to navigate and negotiate a pornographic anti-Black genocidal society. And so that's a lot right there. So the victory is just waking up, you know, it's just getting up out of the bed. And so that's a really real thing. And so just to always remember to return to the center and really look inside of really look inside of that center to think about mastery. And, you know, just thinking about my own personal work, right? What is that erotic mastery that I practice each and every day to strengthen my creative and plus selves? So I'll keep it there. But yeah.
Anybody else want to jump in? Or y'all want me to move to the next question?
That way you have more time to extend questions.
Okay, all right, thank you. Peace and love. I see Zoe up with a question. We gonna turn to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you all so much. This was so encouraging. I just seeing, you know, scholars who are also artists and creative producers. I'm a creative writer and I'm still sort of recovering from doing a master in fine arts and trying to gather the courage to really even see myself as a scholar. It's something that I'm still working on, and I really appreciate just hearing how you all approach your work and also it being so rooted in community. And also just like huge appreciation to Zalika for her work, honestly, in terms of giving me ways of thinking about deviance and shame and sexual violence, and thinking about myself in the context of a Ghanaian. As an aside, I just wanted to say, if you haven't been aware of what's going on to queer people in Ghana, I really encourage you to look it up. The government is basically trying to pass a bill that is anti-queer, and it's frightening in how rigorous it is, to the extent that like it's basically turning people on. Like if their neighbors decide this person in the neighborhood appears deviant in a particular way, if you have tattoos, if you have piercings, if you have shaved sides, if you have locks, if you are disturbing gender in your appearance, they can report you. Even if you tweet in support of queer people, that's 5 years in jail. I mean, it's really, the violence is sort of like unimaginable. And so I really appreciate having some tools to think about what I'm doing as a writer, but as a person, because I'm not there.
Need some water.
Sorry,
I'm buddy.
Quote unquote safe, right? But I'm also terrified because what does moving back there look like? How can I make a life there? You know what I mean? So we just wanted to say that. But sorry for taking up that time. But my question is really about thinking about creative work, both the work that you do and also the work you engage in with your research. Zalika mentioned Sula and just all the panelists talking about different modes of doing their work beyond the sort of academic realm. And I'm wondering, are there ways that you think, maybe it's kind of a selfish question, but I guess as a writer, I'm always thinking about how am I being careful with these characters, especially because I'm usually thinking about like women who are quote unquote dangerously free in a particular way, whose freedom often comes at a cost to themselves. Like it wasn't easy being like a Sula, for example. Like there was a huge cost she had to pay for that. And like even thinking about wayward lives and how romanticized I feel like the narratives in that book have been, when like a lot of those women paid a cost for being seen as deviants at that time. And so I'm just wondering how you think people who are doing creative work, filmmakers, writers, can be careful with portraying those kind of women, or those kind of queer people, and also I think about the danger of falling into the tropes that Dr. Peace and Love had mentioned earlier. I'm wondering whether you expect whether you hope or expect that creative cultural workers will engage with your scholarship, and like what the sort of like I guess dialogue can be between those things, whether in your own practice or in your research.
Thank you so much for that question. It's so important. So if Zalika or Kerby want to respond, and then we will close out with Jaminique's final question.
Yeah, I would just say, like, because where I am at right now, it's just like, because there's so much urgency for us right now, you know, we are in a time where we do need to be speaking to each other across the diaspora and gathering a consensus and alignment on how we going to stop global anti-Blackness. I think artists do need to really engage with mass media as a form. And I think that's why academia has been a struggle for me, because the feedback cycle is so slow. You go through a peer review article and you've been in that bitch for like 2 years. So many people are going to be impacted. So many people are in our community, you know, I mean, you know, the European academic cycle, they have 2 years to pontificate. We don't. And that's why artists are so important and mass media is so important, that Instagram is important. You know, re-putting on these events, having them accessible is important. Having the feedback cycle for our community is going to be important. So I just say, get your ass out there and do it. Move with urgency and engage your community and get that feedback. And take a stand, whether it be the good, the bad, the ugly. Put your voice out there, because the archive will determine who's the victor of history. There will be some girl 30 years from now who'll see your art and make meaning out of it. So you just have to produce with the idea that that we need communal self-knowledge right now, urgently, and we need all perspectives and full compassion for our Blackness.
Zoe, what you said is no, light thing. So first of all, I wanted to acknowledge that because what's happening in Ghana is really important. I think as we're talking about Blackness, we should always be decentering the United States and making sure that we're, centering the fullness and the realities of the diaspora. So one of the things that I wanted to say, and I think it's so important, like, I think you're getting at a very ethical, sort of question, here. So as you're talking about how tattoos and piercings, those kinds of things, like these are the things that people are being criminalized for in Ghana. This is also something that people were being criminalized for in the 1920s, in the context of the United States. If you had an afro, kinky hair, you were going to be labeled a prostitute in this country and criminalized. If you wore your dress at a certain length, you would be criminalized for being a prostitute in this country, in certain parts of the world, particularly New York, per se. Obviously, if you were exhibiting any sort of queer behaviors, you would be literally, criminalized for prostitution. And these things have not changed. In some parts of this country, having nails that look like this can actually have you criminalized, as people would actually mistake you for either a quote unquote sex trafficking victim or a prostitute or sex worker. And the reason why this is important to recognize and engage is because prostitution and sex trafficking literally actually have similar criminal outcomes, even though people are saying that they're trying to save, quote unquote, those who are being sex trafficked. A lot of the times when it's Black or brown people in question, they are usually criminalized, for being trafficked. So I think you're getting at something very important. What is that line between what is it that we are trying to expose? Should it be something that's kept under wraps? And what does the care look like when we're trying to interrogate some of those themes? So for example, I'm a cis person. One of my chapters, I have to engage transness. I'm going to be honest, performatically, there was nothing I could do, as a person, regardless of how I even feel or disoriented, even in my own gender, as a cis person. Still, I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to embody transness. So I did not try to do that. Instead, what I did was I used Islam Nettles' practice with selfies and regarded that as its own form of an artistic practice. And I let her work speak for herself in that regard. And sometimes you just have to make those ethical decisions. And Zoe, I've seen your writings and your work. It's very beautiful. So I'm really, really happy to see you here with us.
Thank you so much. And Zoe, that was I learned so much just from that question. So thank you so much for asking that. And we are going to close out with our last question of the night, Jaminique. Hey, sis.
Wow. What's up, y'all? So it's actually not a question. It's more just a comment. We're gonna end light. We're not gonna have y'all answer too many questions. But I just want to say thank you to you all for I think just listening to you all, it's very clear that you all take your work so seriously, and that means everything. Like this is something that's like an investment for you all. And, I thought I was just going to sit and listen, but it was like, y'all were dropping so many gems. It was hard to not even take notes, even though I knew it was going to be recorded, because it's just something about like writing it down, right? That kind of helps you retain it. And so Z, thinking about this idea, like something that just kind of hit me was like this idea of like counter humanity. I never thought about it in that way. And so I was just like blown away to even think about what that means and what that looks like. And then Dr. Peace and Love, you broadening this idea of erotic, right? Like so often we stay with like the most popular texts and don't really push ourselves to see, okay, yes, Audre Lorde said this, but who else said more about it, right? And so just really moved by that. And then Kerby, I've been following you on Instagram for a minute and just been fascinated just by your brilliance. I happen to also, I was in South Africa in 2015 as well. And so I know Mase was my RA. And so just listening to you like kind of talk through that. And I've been to a couple engagements when you spoke about it. It moved me in a similar way. And I just think it's so funny how timing works to be in places at certain times with certain people. And so what that made me really think about is just really how powerful, and I was actually just reading this piece that Mase wrote, where she was just kind of centering Black women and queer people in that work, right? Because so often, like when I was there, the way I perceived it, it seemed like the men were leading the movement. But what was very clear to me as I was interacting with Mase and, the other people who were involved, it was clear to me that Black women, femmes, queer people were leading this work. And so to even be in conversation with y'all right now, it's very clear that that's still happening. And lastly, I'm just gonna say, you, Kerby, this is to you, you questioning the term queer. This was literally me last week in class with one of my professors who I love so dearly. I just was like, yo, this term don't sit right in my spirit. And so to hear you say it and say, your why, and that just kind of really resonated with me, because I feel like sometimes, within academia, we are kind of forced into these boxes where we have to say what we are. We have to, and so for you to stand boldly and like, I don't really fuck with that term, that means everything. Cause it's like, I really couldn't put words into it, but I was just like, all I know is this term came from a white community and I ain't really feeling it. And for you to say like Black girls in the hood don't have access to it, I was like, that's part of it too. Like that's where it's coming from. And so anyways, I'm just so thankful to be in this space with y'all and just learning so much, like so much respect to y'all, so much love to y'all. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Jam. And Jam did not say, but Jam is also a doctoral student. I don't know if you're a candidate yet, sis, but that candidate is
not quite. Not quite.
You're
not
on
quite.
your way, boo. Thank you so much, love. Thank you for those reflections. And I just want to say thank you so much again to this amazing panel. Y'all, if y'all can please go ahead and flood that chat with affirmations, just letting them know how deeply moved and touched you were by their brilliance. I am going to be rewatching this a number of times because I didn't get to take my notes, but I just appreciate y'all so much. I appreciate to what Jam said, the seriousness and the rigor with which you engage the work that you do is so deeply inspiring. So thank y'all so much. Please let folks know in the chat where they can find you, how they can connect with you. If you on IG, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you at online where folks can find you, please drop it in the chat and let them know. And we are going to close out.
Before you leave, please put the link for your curriculum. It never came up that you mentioned in the beginning. It never came up.
Okay, I'm sorry, y'all. And I have not been looking at the chat at all. I just been vibing and flowing. Thank you so much. I had posted it earlier, but maybe it was before some of y'all came. So I just dropped it in the chat. It is blackwomxnhealing.com/Black Womxn Radical Media. And that's women with the X. So thank you, Michelle, for letting me know. And again, thank y'all so much. We are going to play again Don't Deny, because I know some of y'all came in late and y'all missed it. And I just want to end with Braxton's voice and say thank you, Brax. We love you. And thank you for everything that you continue to teach us and the archive that you continue to be. I'm going to also drop Braxton's IG in the chat, and we will close out with Don't Deny. And please continue to throw love in the chat. Let folks know how they resonated with you and what you are taking from our time together. Thank y'all so much for being here. Thank y'all for coming. Thank y'all for rocking with us. I appreciate y'all so much. Thank you, Dr. Peace and Love. Thank you, Zalika. Thank you, Kerby. Love and appreciate y'all so much. Keep flooding that chat, family. Thank y'all so much again for being here.